most welcome to 835 of the H series. We have a rather clement day here today. It's not too cold, not too hot, around 10 degrees and windy. Nice cloudy sky. I can show you here. If you see, it's a nice setting for the lecture, and I would like to go more into the limits of knowledge, how that works, what is it that causes the limitation on knowledge, how does it work, what is the working system of the limiting thing. And let me once more repeat, this is deconstruction at its very highest level. Deconstruction is, as I repeated so many times before, beyond definitions. If you define it, then you've done it. This is very similar to the question, have you stopped eating your wife? It doesn't matter what you answer. If it's a no or if it's a yes, you are damned. And if you define deconstruction, you are also damned. You are back to the very thing that Derrida tries to do. And I just had to mention my first encounter with deconstruction were actually from a person at the university for his doctoral thesis produced a deconstruction that was defined. When it's defined, it fits nicely into the analytical philosophy, but everything that is deconstruction is completely gone in the same moment you define it. And oddly enough, that was actually my start with deconstruction. It's really weird how we work. I'm not sure if I ever would have gotten into deconstruction if it hadn't been for this doctoral thesis that interests me. And I have to be honest and admit, what intrigues me was this new idea of essence and an even clearer definition without taking in the absolute, neither reflect. That is what I would call a combination of isolated reflection, where you clearly define something by using the negative, and an absolute reflection that you look from everything from a point of nowhere and you miss out on the philosophical reflection. But at least that was my start, and then came quantum mechanics, and there you go. I was, let's see here, I was completely flabbergasted, so to speak. But it is not about defining, it's not about criticizing, it's not about putting a negative side to something positive, or the opposite, putting a positive side to something that is negative. No, it is far more advanced than that, far more advanced. I remember when I was reading Heidegger, he mentioned negation as the ultimate simplification of everything. That's what you get when you are a dunce. You criticize, you are seeing everything in two sides, black and white, right or wrong, or even worse, something in between, compromise. I think it was Edward de Bono who mentioned the compromise as being the utter neglect of thinking, the worst thing you can ever accomplish, or the middle way, or the Swedish lagom, why not? No, what we need to do is look deeper and have a more complicated view of the world. And I think one of the reasons we have such a simplified, almost lack of word, ignorant view of the world is because we never ever take the subject into consideration. What is the inside? And of course that is leading to this incredible oversimplification where everything is absolute, everything is situated in a clear point, and the things around it is not the situated things. That's localization. I'm talking about space, and on a timal view it is the idea that something is clearly placed in time and is not placed somewhere else in the future nor in the past. But today I am going to talk about, I hope this music here doesn't interfere too much with what I'm saying. Let me get into the very juicy stuff here. It is constantly changing here. Structures of not knowing, and it's once more from the dynamics of time and space, with the subtitle Transcending Limits on Knowledge by Tathang Tulku, the Tibetan philosopher. And he's using the system of 4 positions in the logic to a very advanced degree. I would say it's one of the most advanced things I've ever seen in geometry, temporality, or thinking as such. Well, I'm into a paragraph here at page 174 in this book, and the subtitle to the paragraph is Structure of Not Knowing. The patterns we have hinders our efforts at clarity and obstructs our attempts to deal with our difficulties. In every field of knowledge we subordinate experience to the governing concepts and models, or else let the previous outcomes and future expectation pull us away from the present. We insist on structures of dichotomy that turn away from the complexity of the multidimensional. Heaven and hell, sacred and profane, right and wrong, happiness and suffering, truth and falsity, hope and fear. And active at the root of our knowing, such pattern undermine our efforts to discover a different way of knowledge. And its structures of dichotomy, it's eerily close to the deconstruction of Derrida. He says the following, and I had to repeat it. We insist on structures of dichotomy that turn away from the complexity of the multidimensional. Heaven and hell, sacred and profane, right and wrong, happiness and suffering, truth and falsity, hope and fear. We get stranded in these limitations of thinking. Active at the root of our knowing, such patterns undermine our efforts to discover a different way of knowledge. Insight is soon integrated with the established, while intuition leaves intact the positions that shapes conventional knowledge. We may cultivate sensitivity to the flow of feelings or energy within and around us, but our experience still lacks penetrating clarity. Our spontaneous actions must be harmonized with the code of ethics in operation. Our demands for justice advance one claim in opposition to another. You see here how it established the priori, let me show it like this. prioritization. Look here, this is the priority. Disregard this side, don't look at this side, look there. This is the priority. And we define this one by using this one that we put down, and it disappears from view. It's actually a very childish movement. Chikutusho, the Japanese call that way of thinking, and the scary thing is this is the absolutely dominating feature of our thinking within academia today, and it has become progressively so, and it's killing off all thinking life. It's killing off all complexities, all what we could call fractal, deep, depth, interest, energy. It's killing off everything into this incredible simpleton version of reality. It's a simpleton version. It's so far from anything real. I'm at lack of words, but of course that's the closing of the Western mind. This is the reason why we're taking away all our knowledge today. We're not destroying the planet as much as we are killing off knowledge, and that's the major problem. And this is actually pinpointing here. Listen to this. Our Declaration of Rights confirms the existence of wrongs. He's directly pointing to the UN Declaration of Rights. It's all defined in wrongs, which makes it completely blunt as an instrument for morality. Our struggles for peace assure conflict and frustration. Our calls for reform prove that someone else is in control. Each question becomes a claim, each claim a battle, each battle a question of power. Reform or revolution metamorphose through time until they stand revealed as recycling of the status quo. And most important of all, this way of knowing undermines our conscious efforts to go beyond it. When we attempt to understand the workings of mind and awareness, we use the very patterns under investigation as the fundamental tools for inquiry. When we discover indications that a higher, more encompassing knowledge is in operation, we will refer them to a source situated in the realm of the absolute, making them inaccessible to direct experience and investigation. These last two phrases, of course, is identical to what I mentioned as philosophical reflection. That mode of thinking when you shy away from entering into one side of the dichotomy and you encompass both at the same time, and thereby enforcing the nullification of power. It was the nullification of Rudolf Gachet. Visionary knowledge is swept aside or reduced to routine, subverted by the structure of dichotomy. Knowledge that responds to deeper rhythms and possibilities falls by the wayside. As an indication of how pervasive these patterns are, it should be noted that they apply with full force to the present discussion. Certain ways of knowing are designated as inadequate, with the implication that they should be discarded or replaced. We start from the established and we seem obliged to move within its confines. And this is a prerequisite in all debate in Europe today, I'd say. What is established is the starting point for everyone, and you need to play by those rules which severely limits everything that you can say. It doesn't make any obvious possibilities for any new thinking to come into the place. In order to have a discussion, you need to obey certain rules. You don't, but you could do that, and then you will limit yourself severely. So it's great. In this way of knowing, we accept that our own thoughts and our own mind as such do not have intrinsic values, do not carry knowledge. It is the positions that we affirm as right or wrong, not the telling of the story, but its outcome. Not knowing is elevated to a fundamental principle, the original position from which each of us must start. Since this is so, we are in the wrong until proven to be in the right. Our pain, our confusion, our agitation all confirm our own shortcomings. Perhaps we can seek a refuge in something beyond ourselves. This way of knowing, we accept that our own thoughts and our own mind as such do not have intrinsic value. It's the devaluing of the inner subjective stance. It does not carry knowledge. It is only positions that we affirm as right and wrong. We can perceive that as being outside ourselves, distanced. Not the telling of the story, but its outcome. It's not a real telling of it, but it is its surface. And this should be compared to the reflection or of cachet, the superficial reflection of it, or the idea that you look into the mirror and you see your mirror image and it doesn't have a depth to it. And this is one of the sides, the aspects of the mirror reflection that makes it so marvelous, helping to understand what is actually happening. The reflection you get is two-dimensional, it's completely flat. It does not really have any depth to it as such. And depth we've been talking about earlier on. Most of these things do not carry depth. Think about the contradiction in one way. It is usually contradiction without depth. You just have, for instance, in a drawing, so you can say this is drawn. This is a drawing of a mobile. What is around it is the negative surface that defines the mobile or its shape. They two together are philosophical reflection, but it does not have any depth to it. And therein lies the crux, so to speak. There you should look into the idea that negation in the normal sense do not carry depth. Negation should have depth to it, and that makes negation multi-level. If I negate something, it's never clear on what level I do put the negating things. For instance, if you have think about a cone or something like that, and the deeper you go into the cone, the more narrow the pointing edge becomes. But you can think the negation could be on any level. So if you go into debate, for instance, you have an opinion, nobody knows on what level you are presently. I should actually write this on a whiteboard to make it clearer. But think of ourselves as cones, and the level is not clear. Where do we do the negation? And that's the adding of depth. you see here, depth is something that is lacking in knowledge as well, not only time and space. Previously talked, today is very unusual that you really have a good depth perception. You are usually in this flat surface land, and by lacking the very depth, you miss out on specific or on determination. You lack out on to really understand where are you standing in the whole thing. And that added depth is coming from the subject. Not knowing is thereby elevated to a fundamental principle, and this is what I will call flattening out of the differences. You make everything evil level, so you don't know which subject, which author. Is it Shakespeare? Is it some renowned speaker of today? Or is it, for instance, some person I newly came upon who also speaks about the mirror image, that's Hilary Putnam. It does not really make clear on what level he's talking, and that is something very, very important. And I can also add here sorry. Well, we also have Scheele, who speak of mirror being the mirror being what is reflected in the soul. That's another take in it. And you also have Richard Rorty with his book Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature from 1979. And he, oddly enough, he tries to dissolve philosophical problems rather than dispute them. And he's using the Wittgensteinian method, if you like, method of language game. and trying to make a pragmatistic gesture, suggesting that philosophy must get past its pseudo problems if it's to be productive. Language by its own gestures, language by its own image can lend, and that's important. Can is very important. It's not necessary. But what could happen is that we get stuck in this idea of mind being only reflection of what is around us. And once we start in that, that is a rather massive limitation to the depth. The depth is disappearing here, and of course we get, as we mentioned before, we get the idea that mind is a representation of what is around it, and thereby mind doesn't play any role anymore in thinking. It is no longer important. But we also have this change of the outer reality, because if mind reflects the things around it, they become flattened out. They become the mirror image. A mirror image doesn't have, like I have when I'm sitting here, I have dimension to me, I have depth to me. And that's the whole difference. And it affects the subject and the object side at the very same instant. There is no time delay, and that's important as well. Because as soon as you start thinking there could be a time delay, you think that you can actually lock one of the things. You can lock the subjective side, you can lock the objective side. But they do come to existence at the very same time. And once they are established, both sides will always already be in existence. And from that point of view, they have always been existing. You get the whole history with sequences sort of put in a long row where you can pinpoint exactly there it started. There is where it happened from the beginning. And then you have the whole process. And this is of course something that we discussed when it comes to perception. The only model until quite recently within neurology and science of cognition has been the idea that we are perceiving something outside ourselves only. It's only a one-way turn. It doesn't matter how absurd that would be. How can a world be established outside of ourselves, completely independent of ourselves? So already there you start lacking the depth in knowledge. And the only thing in the end with these opinions, it gets sort of a measurer for whether they are positive or they are negative, and that is in the level of rightness. So you get a sort of a percentage, and that percentage in itself is a very, very simplified indication that takes away once more the depth of what you're saying. The cone is disappearing. The cone is not part of what you are doing. And since the cone is not there, the percentage doesn't tell you whether the opinion is correct really, or if it has anything to do, or if it affects anything. And here our pains, our confusion, our agitation all confirm our shortcoming. Now we are coming to Plato in his situation, where he felt that he doesn't have any real connection to reality. and he's lacking this deeper sense of reality. And we start looking for something beyond ourselves to make the world more whole. And this is the time when we go into the supplement. We need something extra to make this perceived lack, this experience lack, more whole once more. We're lacking the dimensions, we are lacking the substance in reality. And we start to search for something beyond ourselves. This is the start of the transcendental consciousness. This is also start of an existence beyond our perceptions, beyond ourselves, and also beyond the objects. He is not of the world, you can say here, something to that liking. But this also means that you completely and utterly give up your capacities. And you can even come to the conclusion that Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus, that there is no refuge. And then you are stranded with something that is truly and entirely and completely hopeless. As long as we are bound to the patterns of the bystander, it's very difficult to imagine how this way of being could ever change. For instance, suppose we resolve to overcome our sense of being separate from our own experience and our surrounding world. I would say that's the point where we are now. Now there is something we must do, something we must obtain or become, something in the future, something not present here really, that can make us whole once more. And here we come to the thing that we have to collect or improve or accumulate to make better or reject or temporize. Without meaning to, we perpetuate an orientation that assures a continued separation. The models we adopt rely on derivations based on from and to that inevitably restrict the knowledge available here and now. The change we pursue will come too late. And this is the turn we took in philosophy. This is the turn of the amnesis, when we forget that there was something established before we start thinking about the whole thing. You can say it like this: we are not free to think because the rules were already set when we started. It's like entering a game that is newly constructed. When you get there, the participant in the game tells you the rules, which rules you have to obey. You have to stay within those rules. And possibly, if you grow up in a system with that, you will not even perceive of the possibility of other rules, of other potentialities, opportunities, or things that could be stranded. So, well, it's a little bit like growing up in flatland. If you're in flatland, how could you ever perceive of more dimensions? One of the reasons we've been using the Klein bottle so often, because that is a sure indication of great depth, of something more substantial, something that actually can give you credibility, a reality in life, and more substance, because then you could rely on yourself without making that subjective. It's in the very turn when you make everything subjective, and that's often when we use the term intuition in contrast to knowledge. And once you've done that, everything becomes your own intuition. It's subjective, it always stands for you, cannot say anything about the world. And it has this air of being pure happenstance, more or less. And you have your lucky stripes. This is also here in this moment there where visionary knowledge is swept aside or reduced to routine, and it's subverted by the structures of dichotomy. Knowledge that responds to deeper rhythms and possibility falls by the wayside. As an indication of how pervasive these patterns are, it should be noted that they apply with full force to the present discussion. Certain ways of knowing are designated as inadequate, with the implication that they should be discarded or replaced. Certain values are as assigned, inviting a particular response that will induce a particular course of conduct. We start from the established and seem obliged to move within its confines. So we have already here by now established the limitations and the borders, and we constructed them ourselves. And that is part and parcel of the problem. It is something that we construct. It doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from here. We are bound to a list that could extend indefinitely, and I would like to compare that to sort of a menu. You have lists, you can only deal within this system of menu, and you cannot leave it. You are in here, nothing can go beyond that menu or list, and that list is created by dichotomies, what something is and what something is not. Well, the whole thing is something that leaves choice out of the picture, because choice is already gone by the time we start philosophy. And I think this is so odd, because this is exactly the point of both Heidegger and Derrida, the choicelessness of thinking in the Western Hemisphere. Everything is already always established by the time we get into it, and by criticizing it, by defining it, we end up doing it much worse. And I think the only way to get out of this is by the mirror, and I would say that's the only pathway of understanding deconstruction at its fullest. Otherwise, it will just be as the first doctoral thesis I once read, that established more than it brought in by Derrida. But if you want to kill off Derrida, define him, you're more than welcome to do that. Then he turns to an analytical philosopher and nothing more. But what you do actually, to be serious, you level everything out by defining, because you don't tell where on the scale the defining exists. And I noticed this intuitively during the years I've been at university. There is no telling on where on the scale the definition is. Never. Because all definitions are treated equal. And I don't think this is rather a good metaphor, actually. I think this could be helpful. Take a regular debate. Let's say it's on television, it's a public debate, you can call in and put your view. Once you do that, the other persons do not have any chance of knowing the level, the depth of your view. That is all equaled out. They don't know you, they're not situated close to you. There's no possibility of them knowing the level, the depth you have inside. None whatsoever. And equally, it's something that happens in a debate, maybe in a newspaper. I participated a couple of times. You debate something, and it's this sense of you are not being completely understood, although the word says exactly what you mean. But the level is not there, the whole context. Things are missing. There is not sufficient information, so to speak, to have an exchange. And that is a problem we ignore, and that in the end levels everything out. And when you level everything out, knowledge is lost. The more you do this, the less knowledge you have. And that this, oddly enough, this can actually be explained from a deconstructivistic viewpoint, but it can also equally as well be described in some way from an analytical philosophical viewpoint. Although then you get into definitions. It could be okay for a while, you get the definitions, you get a zest what it is in wine, maybe in the left hemisphere, and then you can bring that over to the right hemisphere. And I would try to do that. If anybody reminds me about the whole thing, I can do it that way as well. This is what Richard Rorty did in his 1979 book about the mirror in philosophy. But it is very pertinent to the discussion as well, because the leveling out of the depth of the inside, there is where the start of the problem starts. And it's done on the subjective level, I do it, but it's also done on a generalized way in what is communicated, the discourse. Well, why not use the word discourse? Finally, we have some use for it. And as continued in the next paragraph, which is a bit harsh, somehow we have taken on a thankless and unrewarding job. Convinced that it is up to us to be the founders of knowledge in the universe, we have felt obliged to assert our claims to knowledge, even when we know on a deeper level that these claims are unfounded. Aristotle felt the same. And this is often exclaimed by philosophers, I do not know. And I think that's odd. That should stir some sort of wonderment. What is happening? Why does the philosophers themselves feel that there is a lack in what they are saying? And the effect is always they are pointing somewhere else. There is the truth. That's the truth I'm striving for. Because when we don't have truth, we get the thirst, we get an absolute need for something that could fill us up, to make this hole in our chest full once more. And then we start to point somewhere elsewhere, and we don't give that thing up for nothing, because that's all we have. And by not knowing directly, we felt compelled to guess and to pretend, fooling ourselves as well as others. Cut off from our embodiment in space and time, we have nonetheless appointed ourselves spokespersons for time, space, and knowledge as well. Aware of our limitations, we have decided to insist on the small portions of knowledge that we can claim as our own, even if this means accepting as inevitable the endless not knowing that surrounds it. Yes, these prodigious efforts are not needed. The job we carry out exists only in our description of it. We do not need to speak for time and space, for if we know how to listen, time and space speak for themselves. We do not have to proclaim our portion because we are already inseparably related to the whole. When we discover that this is so, a tremendous burden is lifted from our shoulders. We can stand up straight, stretch and take a deep breath. Actually, the very slouching that we have is caused by this lack of understanding of the importance of difference. We do not put tension into the parts of our body that should be tensed, and we are making the parts that should be flaccid, should be loose, too tensed. And this is something we mentioned many times before, the dorsal and the ventral relationship. With the very first step we take, we can let go of the knowledge that we possess and merge with the knowledge that transcends all positions. We can embody this knowledge in ways that are concrete, specific, showing time, space and knowledge in operation. We can for the first time actually use knowledge. And this is what the Honorable Bloom mentioned when closing of the American mind, which applies for all Western thinking. It's a closing off of knowledge. And in the end, it's making knowledge the scapegoat, making history the scapegoat. That's one of the reasons we are doing the same thing as a cultural revolution. We're tearing down statues, we are burning books, we are changing material. All that is a discarding of knowledge. It's a very active process of getting rid of knowledge. Because our infestation, our need to have something beyond, means that we have to get rid of the real knowledge we have, and making that less and less and less and less. And this is exactly as anorexia nervosa, where you starve yourself to death. The limitation on knowledge comes from the basis of knowledge themselves. It comes from academia today. Just as we mentioned some time before, maybe 300 lectures ago, atheism started within theologians, and it's a general tendency going into all strands of academia today, getting rid of knowledge. Knowledge is the enemy number one, because we got stuck somewhere and we are turning in the wrong direction, the transcendental direction, the transcendental consciousness, and we try to get rid of ourselves more and more and more. And it's no wonder we are all suffering from sort of both a mental immune system war, but also quite literally an immune defense illness, where the body is attacking itself, like in allergy, asthma, and what have you. So many more inflammations that constantly are going on, and is not caused by something external in reality, it's caused by internal things. Well, I think I'm at liberty to sigh out and stretch myself, because this is an approach I liked. It's easy to read this Starter Tolkien book after we went through Rudolf Garcia, much more complicated and hard to grasp book. But we still need Rudolf Garcia, because it doesn't get any more eloquent. It's like a rare Burgundy wine, made with the finest Pinot Noir, stored in one of those cellars that filled with spider web and been hidden away for a century or more. And you take out the bottle, you just take away the spider web, take corkscrew and a very nice crystal glass, and you enjoy the very first sip. And that's the sip of knowledge. It has history to it. It is etymology, something founded in something. That is where the value comes from. Okay, I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.